What about those hypnopedia tapes where you play things to people while they're asleep? Can that really have any effect? What about cues given when someone's not awake? Well, there's a lot of concern about that. Because there's a certain point when we are not awake where very nasty things happen to us and we do not want to be aware of them. Who would want to have a memory of being cut open and having bits pulled out of them and stitched up? Well, so this is a topic of current research in anaesthesia and the psychology of consciousness. Can people remember things that happen to them while they are completely anaesthetised? If the surgeon says something negative about them, about their prognosis, can this affect their recovery rate? These are real issues. Well, Levinson carried out an experiment, not a psychologist, not subject to the same ethical constraints, where with people during actual operations, they staged a mock crisis. Stop the operation. I don't like the patient's colour. His lips are much too blue. I'm going to give a little more oxygen. And then they asked them afterwards if they could remember anything that happened during the operation, and found that people claimed that they could remember something about this crisis. And since then, there have been all of these studies have found evidence for learning during anaesthesia. This is evidence against studies that have failed to find evidence of learning during anaesthesia. So it's a big controversy. Does it exist or doesn't it exist? And it seems that it's down to how you measure awareness, how you measure depth of anaesthesia. And Jackie Andrade, who works here, has a hypothesis that anaesthesia, the aim of anaesthesia is not to keep you completely out. It's to keep you lightly anaesthetised. They don't want to give you too much of these drugs because they can be dangerous. Too much anaesthetic and you die. Your heart stops. So the aim of the anaesthetist is to get you just right. They get you anaesthetised, and then someone starts cutting you open, which causes physiological arousal, and you become less anaesthetised. So they have to give you more anaesthetic to keep you down. And it may be that while you're sort of surfing on this up and down wave of anaesthetic, that you might have moments while you're lightly conscious where you can process things that are happening around you. But then you go under again, and that stops you consolidating that memory so you're not necessarily consciously aware of it. This can be very hard to measure, especially given the fact that as well as the anaesthetic, they give you neuromuscular blockers to paralyse you. So if you were fully conscious, you still wouldn't be able to move. And that's what's so scary about this. So in some surveys, a very small percentage of adult patients have reported recall of surgery on recovery. Less than 1/7 of 1%. But there's so many operations carried out, this is still a large number. And in fact, in a recent survey, the percentage was found to be a bit higher than that. Are the others really unconscious? There's a technique called the isolated forearm technique where they tie a band around the arm and it stops those paralysing neuromuscular blockers from getting into the arm. And then they can ask the patient while they're asleep, if you can hear me, raise your thumb. 7 out of 40 adult patients could do that. So even though they were anaesthetised, they could respond to stimuli. They're able to process things. 2 out of 186 children in a paediatric study responded. Maybe these are the patients who are able to report some sort of learning later on. So Deep Rose carried out a study where they played words to people over a tape during the operation. So no mock crisis. This is a psychological study now. Just neutral words. So words like tractor. Then afterwards, you give them all of these words, but just the first 3 letters, T-R-A, and ask them to complete this word fragment with any word that comes to mind. And of course, if you've got some sort of memory, even if it's not a conscious memory, if it's what's called an implicit memory, you're not aware you've got it, then you might say tractor with a greater likelihood than someone who has no memory of this. So this is called an implicit memory test. Now the words were either presented during anaesthesia before surgery or during anaesthesia during surgery while the painful operation is going on. Nobody could actually remember hearing these words when they asked them afterwards, and the EEG measures that the anaesthetist used said that the anaesthetic was working, that they were deeply anaesthetised. But the implicit memory score, before surgery, it showed that these people were not affected. They did not have more tendency to complete the TRA with the word tractor. If the word list was played during surgery while the painful operations were going on, then they did have significant implicit memory for these words. So here we do have a very good, well-controlled psychological evidence that we can perceive things while we're anaesthetised, and they can affect our subsequent behaviour without us realising. So this is a true subliminal effect. The final example I'm going to use came from a replication of a social psychology experiment about judgment and personal decision making and the way that we can form stereotypes based upon the way that physical characteristics tend to co-vary with personality types and so on. And Levitsky had demonstrated that people could learn these subtle relationships without realizing it, even when it was just to do with hair length or something, but was not relevant to the personality construct that was being co-varied. And found that if people had been exposed to these cues, that long hair always went with a description of being intelligent or something like that, that if they were then asked to say whether or not this person is intelligent, if they had that background information, it would slow them down, because they would be having to take it into consideration. Now, this was strange, because this is a reverse of what you'd normally expect as a cognitive psychologist, where if you've given people information, it should help them on a task. It's the reverse of the normal priming effect. So again, Andrade and a PhD student of hers, Lynn Barker, carried out a very much better controlled experiment where they actually used the same photographs because there were some problems with the stimuli in the other experiment. And they used Photoshop to edit the hair length. So here we have the same picture, and I don't know which is the original. They've either added hair to the one on the left or trimmed it off on the one on the right. And they showed 3 short-haired people and 3 long-haired people alternating. One hair length was always described as kind in a pen portrait. So this person does a good deal for others. And the other hair length is always described as capable, amidst all sorts of other descriptors as well. Then they were shown some new faces with long hair or short hair and asked to rate for how kind they were and how capable they were. And now they got the normal priming effect, that people were faster when the test face had the relevant hair length. So when they had long hair and they'd been paired with kind people, they would be faster when they had this information than when they didn't. So here we have a visible thing, so it's supraliminal. It's a bit like the hidden images here. You don't know, you're not aware of the covariation, the fact that whenever you see this particular image, it's paired with a particular piece of information. And yet you learn that association, so it affects your subsequent behaviour and speeds up your decision making. So can that be used in advertising? Well, yes, it can, because it's what forms the basis of product placement. Companies go to great lengths to have their products used in films, but they don't have them used by the evil characters. It's always the goodies that have the brand new Mac and iPhone and beer, not cigarettes anymore. It's the goodies that drive the cars that have been lent to the production company. The ones they have to buy, they give to the baddies. So the companies know that you will associate the product with all the good characteristics of the hero in the film, simply by repetitively showing it in the context of that character using it. So this hidden covariation does affect behaviour. Is that what we mean by subliminal advertising? I don't know, but they do use it, and it does work. So maybe here we've found evidence that that myth is sort of true. So in conclusions, we've seen that very brief visual exposure, masked, can be subliminal. We've seen that supraliminal exposure during surgery affects our behaviour. Supraliminal mere exposure effects affect our behaviour. We've seen that the hidden covariance can affect our behaviour. And advertisers do sometimes embed images in their pictures, like the BBC did, but they intend you to see them. Now, rock bands do now embed backwards messages in their lyrics, mainly to create furore and get people to buy, download, play backwards so that they increase their sales. But there's no evidence of these last two things upon behaviour. So please, not only don't worry about it, but you can't blame them for your mistakes.